Good morning, everybody. Mark Zusman from Willamette Week. Delighted to be here with Bobbin Singh. Bobbin, you are the executive director. Is that the correct title?
That's right. The
In the
founding executive.
And the organization is the Oregon Justice, is it Resource Center?
That's correct.
Can you just give us a brief description of what your organization does?
Yeah, the Oregon Justice Resource Center is a public interest law firm based in Portland, Oregon, but we're a statewide nonprofit that provides legal services to individuals that are going through the criminal justice system or who have been harmed by state actors or the system itself.
We wanted to reach out and talk to you because earlier this week, you and a number of other civil rights leaders called for the resignation of Mayor Wheeler and Police Chief Lavelle. And we wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. I mean, as you know, the narrative in this city has been that President Trump is using Portland as a proxy campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And that the city of Portland is caught in this terrible position. Wheeler has been getting a lot of criticism from the right for allowing the protests and the looting and the rioting to take place. And then, of course, from the left, you and a number of other civil rights organizations have sort of joined in, albeit with a slightly different opinion, but also of the opinion that he needs to go. So can I ask you to sort of reprise your argument about why you think it's time for the mayor and the police chief to resign?
So for the past 4 years, our organization, along with a number of other civil rights organizations and community groups, have been trying to engage with the mayor, both around the issues around police accountability and transparency, and also trying to put in infrastructures and practices in place to push back against the impact or the influence of far-right groups. We have consistently tried to engage with the mayor's office. We have sat in numerous meetings with the mayor. We have actually provided strategies and tactics to the mayor around both of these issues. And so, you know, it's based on 4 years of experience with the mayor that we recognize that there's just nothing there. There is no opportunity that exists to work with this mayor to actually first either improve police accountability or rein in the Portland Police Bureau, and two, to push back against these far-right groups. And I think what we've seen now over the past year and over the past week is the confluence of these events where we've had a racial justice conversation happening in the nation and Black Lives Matter protests for the past 100 days. We've witnessed and experienced police brutality, violence, indiscriminate, discharging of chemical and munitions against protesters. And now you've seen the influx of these far-right groups making a presence with these protests. And I think what we saw last week, unfortunately, was the tragedy that played out, and something that we had been warning Mayor Wheeler about. This was our biggest fear, that someone would die in the streets of Portland. We didn't know how or who would it involve, but we were scared either through by law enforcement or with these groups interacting that someone would die, and someone did. And what we know now is that Mayor Wheeler does not have the capacity or the ability to be able to navigate us through these next 3 months. This is only going to intensify as we hit the November election.
Again, the word rogue police department has been used, not by you, but I think some of your colleagues, in their attempt to call for the resignation of Ted Wheeler and Police Chief Lavelle. So what is it you mean about when you call it a rogue police department? Is it your belief that this is a police department that is unbound and that is acting without the direction of the police chief and the mayor, and is resorting to violence only against the left?
I mean, I think the evidence speaks for itself. I think what we see is just indiscriminate use of force against protesters. We see violence. We've seen historically in Portland, Black men and women and those others on the margins that have been murdered by the police department without any accountability. I think what you see, almost nightly from the Portland Police Bureau, is violence conducted by its officers in a manner in which they're operating. It doesn't seem like they seem to feel like they're going to be either suspended, terminated, or even arrested for their conduct. I mean, the type of violence that they're conducting, I mean, the Overton windows shifted so much that the type of violence that they're conducting, punching people, I mean, for the first few few weeks of this, the amount of tear gas that was discharged on Portland streets was unbelievable, and just shooting it off randomly. I mean, the fact that we're even debating whether or not how this should be done, or is this reasonable, has the window has shifted so much that we're not talking about, like 5 years ago, the kind of violence that we've been seeing in the streets, I think would have horrified most community members. But now we've become so used to it that, yeah. So to answer your question, I do think like the Portland Police Bureau, when we say rogue or use that term, I think what it functionally means is that there's no oversight, there's no accountability mechanisms that exist.
But I wanted to ask you about the police chief. You've made very clear your argument against Ted Wheeler. As you well know, the police chief has been on the job, less than 3 or 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
It's because the police chief who preceded him, Jamie Resch, who was fairly new to the job, resigned. I think she resigned in part because, if we can be honest, she felt she was the wrong color skin to be the head of the police force at this moment in time. Chief Lavelle, who's been with the Bureau for a while, is Black, well regarded. What's your concern with him? Why do you want him to step down?
Well, I think in the past 100 days, the evidence suggests why. Like the Portland Police Bureau doesn't seem to be operating with any command and control structure or accountability structure. The types of violence that we've been seeing by individual officers has never been denounced. We don't know of any individual officer that's been suspended or terminated for discharging chemical weapons or munitions or actually committing violence. But let's go back to that initial, how you introduced how Chief Lavelle came into a power, or as the chief. It was over the weekend. It was done by the chief and Portland Police Bureau itself. I don't know what role Mayor Wheeler actually had in selecting Chief Lavelle. It doesn't seem like it was very much.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it was all.
Right. So was there civilian oversight of the appointment process? Was there a community process for him to become chief? Is he the best person? Who knows? No one had any opportunity to weigh in. And when we talk about a rogue police department, I mean, I think this highlights it. They selected their own chief. I mean, what more? What an agency with no accountability or any oversight. I mean, this is what it looks like, right? They select their own leader, and that's who it is. And the community has no ability to be able to have any input or say in that. And it's seemingly the mayor has no input or ability to be able to weigh into that either.
At the risk of pushing this past the point where it's useful, again, one of the more troubling implications that your side has made is this idea of a rogue police department that has the sophistication and resources and capability to identify these bad actors, and that they have the skill set and they're not. The suggestion that Portland police have adequate intelligence on, who the Proud Boys are that are coming to town, and they ought to intercede. That's more than incompetence. That's malevolence.
Mm-hmm.
And is that in fact what you and your peers are arguing, that there is an active effort, that it's not as if they're saying that we don't care. It's like, we know who these bad guys are. We've got the skill set. We've got the intelligence. We're sharing information with other law enforcement agencies, and we're just sitting on our hands.
I'm not really too sure, that I would put it that way, but I do think there is a bias. I think there is some evidence to suggest, or strong evidence to suggest, both nationally, I think a lot of research has been done around this, and even locally, about how law enforcement perceives these far-right groups as more mainstream, more in line with the values of themselves, and don't see them as much of a threat. I think it is who these individuals are, who these groups are. Proud Boys, Pray to Repair, other far-right groups like Oath Keepers, 3%ers, whatever, all these far-right groups, it's not a secret who they are. They're out there publicly, they're live streaming, they're very public facing. They're very loud about their presence. They don't hide their activities. So it doesn't require, that much information gathering. You just have to go on social media to kind of figure out what's going on. So I do think there is the ability to be able to be more responsive in a way that's protective of the community by just looking at the information that's easily available. Now, I do think professional law enforcement agencies that are supposedly skilled with these investigation skills can and should be doing better work. My expectation is that they probably have a better sense of who these individuals are and their tactics and strategies. But I think just on the superficial level, I think it's more along the lines of that they just perceive these groups to be more more in line with their own philosophies and more mainstream.
Bobbin, the whole defund the police movement, which has really taken root in the last couple of months, both in Portland and around the nation, is now getting some pushback by liberals, pointing out that defunding the police means that police forces in this country will be whiter and more conservative than they already are now. I'm wondering what you think of all that.
I think I think we get too hooked into like these buzzwords or this language and not look at the concept of what's driving these this language. So I think like abolition and defund, people focus too much on the literal definition, like we're just going to take money away from the police or we're going to abolish the police. And I think we have to look more at the philosophy that's driving that language, which is, we need to remove the conditions in which we as a society are relying on our criminal justice system and local law enforcement to deal with a complex set of social and economic issues. And I think that's really what's driving this stuff. So even defunding police, it's about reorienting the resources so our community can be healthier. And so, we're supportive of that approach. We're supportive of those concepts and that drive. I think it's unfortunate that, I think the way in which things get sometimes reported or spoken about, it gets simplified or reduced into a way that scares people. And I think at this moment, our obligation is to be able to be open to a complex and nuanced conversation, because what we're dealing with is issues in an environment that has been created over the past 200 years. It's not something that just happened or something that just got kicked up. But unless we're willing to actually reckon with that history and understand how that history has created the current conditions and understand that it's going to take time to unwind that, and that's going to require some complexity, then, of course, I think people are going to push back against that. But what I would encourage people to do is embrace the complexity, embrace the discomfort. Let's focus on what makes our communities healthier. How do we ensure that people are able to live a life with dignity and able to fully participate in our society with no barriers or restrictions?